A lot of folks, it's really amazing to see how this was reflected in media reporting here this morning, because I woke up to as many headlines in the tip sheet saying it was a big night for progressives, changing the face of the Democratic Party, to those saying it was a disappointing night for progressives. He only got it out with 1 point, and it was supposed to be a double-digit blowout. Kyle, how are you looking at this specifically Senate primary in Michigan?
Yeah, I think expectations got out of whack because the polling ended up being sort of out of whack. And I think one thing that may have been going on here is that, primary electorates are generally skew even older than general election electorates. And there was some sense that maybe pollsters were showing an electorate that was maybe younger than what we ultimately got last night. I think if you told me like 2 months ago that El Sayed won this primary by a point, I'd say, hey, that's pretty impressive performance for progressive candidate. I think, if you look at it more recently, and, El Sayed himself and his allies kind of punched up, or, kind of overinflated his chances by putting out a lot of polls showing him doing quite well. You could then say, well, I guess compared to the expectations as of a few days ago or as of yesterday, El Sayed sort of underperformed. So it's just kind of a strange expectations thing. I do think probably Stevens would have been the safer choice for Democrats, although she didn't exactly light the world on fire in her own campaign. And just in terms of candidate skills, I think El Sayed was probably stronger, but he's also definitely a more kind of factional, clearly left-wing candidate. And, in a swing state race, you'd probably have someone you'd probably rather have someone who's perceived as closer to the center. So I think El Sayed probably will underperform what you might expect a generic Democrat, although, there's no such thing as an actual, generic Democrat or Republican. But in a year like this, even if he does underperform, that still may not prevent him from winning, given that this is a Democratic-leaning year.
Well, that's fascinating to hear. The president weighed in last evening. I'm not sure he even knew who was running this. I can't understand what it says. Great news for the Republican Party. And I get the spirit of that. El Sayed, a communist loser, he writes, who hates Jews and Israel, is the projected winner in his race with the socialist. I thought he was projecting El Sayed as I guess he means Haley Stevens. As usual, the polls were way off on this one. She was not expected to do nearly as well as she did. Are we talking about, I don't know what, now the Democrats' crazy policies, he says, will only get worse. Let's forget, because I don't even understand where we're going in that post for a minute. Kyle, the conventional wisdom that not only is El Sayed a weaker general election candidate, but that the Democratic Party is having this massive internal fight with socialism and communism. Does this race represent that, or is this a single race story?
I do think there's a trend. I think over the summer, kind of going into a lot of the primary season, the thought was, well, are the Democrats actually going through their own kind of Tea Party moment that Republicans went through and arguably are still going through, 15 years ago after Barack Obama got elected? The initial results from primaries were kind of mixed earlier this year. I do think the results from the summer do point to kind of a growing strength for kind of more left-wing anti-establishment forces within the Democratic Party. That doesn't mean that the left-wing candidates are always going to win these races. Another result last night was Representative Wesley Bell in Missouri's 1st District. He won pretty comfortably against Cori Bush, who's a more left-wing candidate who Bell unseated in 2024, and then he won his rematch easily. So again, you're not going to see this consistent result in every single race. Sure. But again, I do think that progressives are on the rise. Another race that's worth noting is Michigan's 7th congressional district, which is one of the most competitive U.S. House seats in the whole country, held by Republican Tom Barrett, district centered on Lansing and Michigan State University, and then some more conservative turf around it in sort of the middle of Michigan. William Lawrence, who's a progressive candidate, he ended up winning against two kind of more establishment-oriented Democrats. And again, you look at Lawrence winning, you look at El Sayed winning. I think that it is possible that these candidates will underperform. It is possible that they might kick away winnable races for Democrats, but I wouldn't just necessarily take it for granted that they will.
William Lawrence, a co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, as it's called. I'm glad you mentioned him because a big part of his platform was opposition to data center development, which I know is landing to some extent in your state and my state of Virginia. And I should ask you about Virginia's 2nd congressional, because this is A different storyline, but an important race here with Jen Kiggins, Republican, and former Congresswoman Elaine Luria in a rematch here. It looks like this is Virginia Beach, one of the most competitive in the state. What's got your attention there?
Yeah, I mentioned Michigan 7 is one of the sort of the best swing districts in the country. Virginia 2 is another one of those districts. There are only maybe 24 or less districts in the whole country that really voted very similarly to how the nation voted for president in 2024. Michigan 7 is one, Virginia 2 is another. Virginia 2 is another toss-up race. Again, at the end of the day, you'd probably expect Democrats to flip Virginia 2 if they're winning the House. But if they don't, and that'll be a race to watch early on election night, just like in Virginia when Abigail Spanberger won re-election in 2022, it was a sign that the Republicans maybe weren't getting the kind of wave that they were hoping for in 2022. Virginia 2 will be another really key race to watch along with Michigan 7, which we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about this new map, an expanded map from the DCCC. As we describe these races in detail, let's go broad here for a moment because the D-Trip just added 12 Republican-held districts to its battle map, bringing the target list up to 58 seats. And it's put some recognizable names here in the crosshairs. Lauren Boebert, Victoria Spartz, French Hill, Tony Gonzalez. What do you make of this expanding map? Mike Flood is on here, Kyle. Is this realistic?
The districts that the D-Trip recognized today or put out today, that's a mix of districts that some of them I still call as safe Republican in our rating. Some of them we have as likely Republican. We actually moved Boebert onto our board as likely Republican last week, although that's a district that a Republican should definitely be able to win, even in a wave environment. But we have seen this dynamic in which, for instance, there was a Democratic poll in Virginia 2, which we were just talking about, that was tied. And so that Democratic internal poll, that's actually a good result for Republicans. On the other hand, the Democrats have been releasing polls across the country in districts that aren't at the center of the battlefield that show pretty competitive results. And I think that's reflected in the DCCC trying to cast a wide net. In 2018, when Democrats flipped the House, they didn't win all of the sort of battleground seats, but they won almost all of them, or the lion's share of them. 2006, when Democrats flipped the House, the Republicans actually held up pretty well in some of the key battleground races that year. But Democrats ended up flipping a lot of kind of surprising seats, and maybe Democrats will be able to do that to some extent. But districts where Trump won by more than 10 points, they may be able to win a few of those races, but you probably won't expect them to win a lot of them.
Right.